and welcome to the Bridging Borders Project. I'm Hannah Hundle, and today we're bringing you an interview with Prime Minister Silva of Cabo Verde.
And my name is Syed Rajagopal. Cabo Verde is an island archipelago nation off the coast of Africa. Please join me in welcoming the Prime Minister of Cabo Verde. Your country has been cited as an African development success. With so few natural resources, how have you been able to ensure that you have a strong democracy and stable development indices?
First of all, it is a pleasure to participate in this interview. What I can say in terms of a response is that, first of all, natural resources and minerals on their own don't bring about development. They help, but they're not the decisive factor. The proof is that there are many countries rich in natural resources and minerals that are poor in terms of human development, which is what counts. For us, the important thing is to transform natural resources into education, healthcare, employment, expertise, innovation, technology, good governance, and entrepreneurship, because these are in fact the true drivers of development, and they can be developed without mineral resources and with few natural resources. The proof is that in Cabo Verde, we have few such resources, but we've invested heavily in developing human capital, meaningful education, quality information, a favorable environment, and entrepreneurial mindset. A strong investment in social and political stability, security, and good governance. These are our key assets, and they are key assets because they have a significant impact on trust. The trust of our development partners, the trust of our citizens, and the trust of investors. Natural resources. We transform the sea and the climate, so we actually do have natural resources. By transforming the sea and the climate into tourism and the maritime economy. We've transformed an abundance of sunlight and wind into renewable energy, the sea into desalinated water in a country with a shortage of rainfall. I say that more than 90% of the water for domestic consumption is produced through desalination. We're desalinating water for agriculture. We have another important resource, which is the country's location between Africa, Europe, the US, and Brazil, which is an important geostrategic resource.
Mr. Prime Minister, as climate change exacerbates hurricanes and other critical climatic events affecting your country, what are your solutions to lobby for a reduction of carbon emissions?
First of all, it's a strong investment in energy transition to reduce dependence on fossil fuels. That's one way we contribute towards reducing carbon emissions. Cabo Verde is extremely dependent on the importation of fuels, and we see it in our energy bills when international prices go up. From our current 20% renewable energy penetration, we intend to reach 54% renewable energy in 2030, 100% in 2040, including the adoption of electric vehicles. So that's our strategy, which is a consequence of the country's natural conditions.
Prime Minister, what is the number of COVID cases that are currently active in the country? How many recoveries have there been, and how many deaths are there to date?
At the moment, we have 658 active cases, 3,628 recoveries, 42 deaths, with a total of 4,330 confirmed cases up until this point.
Mr. Prime Minister, with regard to COVID-19, can you tell me a little bit more about if or when you decided to go into lockdown and your rationale behind that?
Look, we adopted quarantine measures very early on. On February 27th, we banned flights from Italy to Cabo Verde due to the exponential growth of cases in Italy, specifically the north of Italy, in Lombardy. Many tourists from the north of Italy traveled to the islands of Sal and Boavista. That was the first closing of the borders with Italy. On March 17th, Before recording our first case in Cabo Verde, we banned passenger flights and maritime connections applicable to all countries. On March 28th, we declared a state of emergency and a total national lockdown. April 26th, Cabo Verde, actually 7 of our islands, went out into a state of emergency. The islands that hadn't recorded any positive cases at the time. The last island to exit the state of emergency was Santiago on May 14th. That's to say, we experienced a fairly long lockdown with differentiated responses according to each island's individual unique situation.
Prime Minister, could you talk to me a little bit about what you've been doing on the island to keep people safe from COVID-19? Do you have contact tracing and isolation measures in place? And do you have mask wearing as a universal rule on your islands?
Yes, we started testing on March 14th. At the time, we were sending samples to Senegal. Cabo Verde had no lab for coronavirus testing. The current situation is that since then, we have invested into labs. Right now, we have 2 labs in the city of Praia, including at the University of Cabo Verde. We have 1 laboratory in São Vicente, 1 in Sal, 1 on the island of Fogo. Each lab covers a combination of islands, which facilitates the process for obtaining results. Secondly, at the moment, Cabo Verde is the country in Africa performing the second most tests in proportion to its population. We have a population of about 550,000 people. We have already more than performed 50,000 PCR tests and more than 50,000 rapid antigen tests. We legally require rapid tests for inter-island travel. We also perform tests for purposes of screening and identification, which means the more tests that are performed, the more likely it is to identify cases. As for masks, we've required masks in public and private services, anywhere providing service to the public. Masks are considered essential work equipment, which is to say, provided by the employer at no cost to the worker. Masks are required on public transit, for air and maritime travel, schools, and events. More recently, we established the use of masks on the street as a public duty. Starting in October of this year, that will become mandatory as well. We also distribute free masks to the poor and individuals in high-risk groups, so we can have as many people as possible wearing masks to protect themselves and others.
Mr. Prime Minister, can you tell me a little bit more about how you plan to help the citizens who've lost their jobs during this pandemic, especially considering the fact that tourism is a major contributor to your economy?
We have put in place an extensive program for employment protection, household income, and business. The furlough process was simplified to protect job contracts. Workers receive 50% of their salary guaranteed by Social Security and 50% from their employer in order to preserve those jobs. We simplified access to unemployment benefits. For situations in which individuals lose their jobs, access to credit lines with very favorable terms subsidized by the state, as well as banking and fiscal moratoria, in order to provide businesses with liquidity. That way, we can maintain employment. We also created a strong program of support for informal workers. Many women and individuals work in the informal sector. They've had access to a benefit that we call solidarity income. This income was created during the state of emergency. This combination of programs has allowed us to survive and stay agile in this fight against COVID-19.
Prime Minister, so Cabo Verde relies heavily upon tourism for its GDP. I wanted to ask you, how exactly do you plan to reopen borders during the COVID-19 pandemic?
We have a differentiated situation for each island. Our priority is to position Cabo Verde as a clean and safe destination. We are taking a combination of sanitary measures, also at the level of healthcare, to position Sal and Boa Vista, which are the most heavily frequented islands, to begin welcoming visitors again. Those two islands, Sal and Boa Vista, have few active coronavirus cases. Sal has 40 active cases and 5 deaths. Boa Vista has 0 active cases and 1 death. Of course, reopening doesn't just depend on Cabo Verde, but also on source countries. We're working aggressively to rebuild confidence, which is what's at issue for people to be able to return, catch some sun, and benefit from our sea, climate, and neighborly spirit.
Mr. Prime Minister, how do you plan to work with the African Union to manage the pandemic and keep trade and business active?
We all agree about the need for more support for African countries in the fight to contain the spread of the virus, to ensure universal access to the vaccine once it is available, and to implement foreign debt pardons in response to the extraordinary costs of COVID-19. And we must also mark the new era of structural transformations that can impact African economies and their human development indices. In Cabo Verde's case, we have a very strong agenda for structural transformation. We hold that foreign debt pardons can be linked to a combination of strategic, transformative investments for 2030, which can make the country more sustainable and resilient in the face of external conditions. And we have a program for structural transformation centered upon 2 points. One is the development of human capital. Another is health security at a level that can build trust, together with the digital economy, energy transition, and a water strategy linked to renewable energy and the blue economy, which is an important factor in diversifying the economy in the years to come, along with sustainable tourism. These are the main elements we'd like to leverage to convince creditors and partners that the resources unlocked by a debt pardon will be used to finance this transformative agenda over the medium and the long terms. For example, over 10 years of execution, we need resources available during such a period to finance and drive sustainable transformation after COVID-19.
Cabo Verde has a history of being a slave trading port. As the United States faces its own calls for reparations and actions against racism, what do you think that the global North could do to help the global South in terms of reparations and racial justice?
History has resulted in some good things over the centuries at the level of science, technology, and quality of life. It's also resulted in bad things: slavery, the greatest assault against the divinity of man, whose effects are still felt today. Now, in terms of reparations for slavery, in our understanding, it's about entering a new era in which African countries can achieve their objectives sustainably. A strong partnership is needed for this to happen. That means 2 things: responsibility on the part of African countries and for the rest of the international community. This way, I believe everyone stands to gain at the level of the economy, security, environment, and climate issues. This is why we think the Debt Pardon Initiative, by promoting structural transformation designed to achieve objectives sustainably, can be an important tool in securing partnerships through which everybody gains.
And finally, Mr. Prime Minister, I want to ask if you have any words of encouragement or advice for our listeners in the global community about how we can come together to overcome this pandemic.
The coronavirus pandemic has shown us who we are, and it's showing us what happens when the world grows disconnected at the level of the economy, mobility. Everyone loses, though it's clear some lose more than others, but the overall effect is negative. It's showing us something else, which is the importance of civic duty, the necessity of internalizing guidelines. If everyone followed the guidelines, social distancing, mask wearing, good hygiene, a lockdown wouldn't be necessary, with all the negative social and economic impact that it brings. So it's still a major struggle because it depends a lot on the behavior, attitude, and responsibility of citizens.